Hello there. Welcome to vSphere Live, October 5th, 2023. My name is Bob Plankers. I'm a staff technical marketing architect at VMware Corporation. I deal in vSphere and cloud infrastructure, security, and compliance a lot. I can talk about vSphere at length by itself as well. So, for those of you that are joining, I appreciate you. Thanks for coming out. I will answer questions, comments if you've got them. Put them in the chat. We are streaming to various locations. You might be hello, Louise. You can see this on Twitter. You can see it for X now. We've got YouTube, of course, the LinkedIn and Facebook. If you're, I'm using a tool called StreamYard to distribute the stream to all of those things. So, and it aggregates comments. If your comment or question is not coming through, or you don't see me answering it, I'm usually fairly prompt about answering them. So if you don't see it, come on over to the YouTube side of things and pose it there. But I believe LinkedIn and Facebook, the comments work just fine. So I think it's Twitter. At any rate, let's talk about hardening, virtual infrastructure hardening, and all that's related to that. You know, that's a lot. That's a big topic, that sort of thing. And this is part one. Part two, I think I'll do at the end of the month, end of October. And we'll talk about a few other things. We'll go into some networking things. We'll go into some availability sorts of things, dependencies, that sort of stuff. Security in a virtual infrastructure, this could be a 2-day workshop when it comes right down to it. And so, but I'm planning on going about 90 minutes today if we can, and depends on how many questions and that people have. Next week, I've got another talk, protecting Active Directory and workloads. You know, this is all sort of in support of the Cybersecurity Awareness Month. October in the U.S. has been designated as Cybersecurity Awareness Month. You should do security more often than every October, please. I would appreciate that greatly if you did security all the time. And that's my goal, is to help enable you to do that sort of security on a continuous basis without having to spend day and night doing it. You know, how do you set yourself up for success? Obligatory disclaimer, basically saying, don't listen to me at all. I'm crazy. You should do your own thing. And that's true, actually. Context is really important in security. And the idea that everyone's environment is different, that's a powerful thing. You're going to have to make some decisions based on data. You know, what I think is a good idea might not be right for your organization. Might not be enough for your organization, might be too much, and so ultimately you get to choose you choose your own adventure, just like the old kids books. I wonder if those are still around, by the way. But so today I want to talk about hardware. We very rarely talk about hardware in context of security and prepping for ESXi and things like that. And there's a lot of stuff we can do at that level. Hardware hardening. Just like I said, VMware usually leaves that to other folks, but let's talk about that a little bit. Isolation, perimeter firewalls, that sort of thing, very important. Please don't hang it. Thank you again, Louise. It's a delightful that you are here as well. And just as a reminder, for people that are joining, if you've got questions, comments, put them out in the chat, and I will answer as I go here. But perimeter firewalls and that, very important for infrastructure. Infrastructure can't protect itself the same way we can protect workloads. And so, important there. Identity management, hackers are just logging in. I shouldn't use the word hacker. Hacker has good connotations. The bad actors, the threat actors, the cyber criminals. Turns out they're just logging into stuff, and there's been some recent things in the news, high profile ransomware attacks and that, where it absolutely came through the identity provider, that sort of thing. And then at the end, we'll talk about the security configuration guide. It's the baseline, it's the reference implementation for securing the technical controls, and maybe some design aspects too, but the technical controls around securing and auditing an environment. And we've got some new stuff. I released a new version of that this morning. In fact, late night. It was just after midnight my time here in southern Wisconsin, and we've got some new audit scripts. People have been asking this for these for about 15 years, and our lawyers finally let us do it. So let's get into it. A VJ, yeah, me too. That's it's exciting topics, and yeah, I get to stretch my programming brain a little bit. It's been a while, I got to tell you. So when we talk about hardening infrastructure, this is a graphic that I stole from our VMware Cloud on AWS shared responsibility model, and it does a good job of sort of delineating where what workload versus everything else. Usually this is used for cloud providers, but everything below the line is the stuff that I'm worried about. Next week we'll talk about the stuff above the line, and that'll be good. But like I was saying, security always depends on context. I was just explaining that your context is going to be different than others. Security is always a trade-off. We're always trading, well, budget, staff time's just a form of budget. Will to live, like I often joke about that, but idle timeouts are a good way to terrorize sysadmins, that sort of thing. It's always a trade-off, but sometimes we can minimize that trade-off, and that's actually something VMware works on pretty hard. We've got a small army of user experience designers that worry about how humans interact with stuff. They're the ones that rearranged everything for the HTML5 client back in the day. And everyone hated that to start with, and then it started to make sense. Hey, this is laid out a lot better, that sort of thing. And so we try to keep doing that. Native key provider, we did a lot of UX work with, and it's really easy to use, and that's terrific. And so yeah, not to toot our own horn, but we're proud of some of those things. The last thing here, compliance isn't security, nor is security compliance. Many organizations conflate the two of them. Compliance is a business requirement, and it's to participate in an industry. If you want to run a nuclear power plant, you need to comply with, in the US, the North American Electric Reliability Company, NERC SIP, for example. You want to take credit cards, you need to comply with PCI DSS, the payment card industry's data security standard. And that's an entry. Once you meet those standards, you can enter that market. You can do that work. You can get paid, but it's always a negotiation too, because it's never as straightforward as a technical control. There's a lot of folks that take the security configuration guide and try to apply it to PCI. And there's all sorts of other things that help with that. And I'm going to make a short detour here, but, and forgive me, but we'll get to the meat of it in just a minute. But PCI DSS for requirement 1, build and maintain a secure network and systems. Oh, okay. Like that's, yeah, no problem. Easy to do. But, how do you do that? Technical controls? Well, that's a design thing. There's all sorts of stuff that you can use to help with that. NSX firewalling for the workloads, VLANs and port groups and isolation there, host firewalls, distributed switches, virtual switches, or distributed switch filtering. We'll talk about that in a little bit too. A lot of stuff can go into helping people meet these requirements, and then being secure, that's the goal. And not just being secure in October, but being secure all the time. That's what we're worried about. Compliance, if you're only doing security when compliance audits happen, you're in trouble. I'll just tell you that. So how do people get into trouble? How do we see, what are the attack vectors for VMware customers? Compromised credentials, absolutely the number one thing. Hackers are logging in. Again, I'm using hackers. Please forgive me if you're a benevolent hacker. Hollywood has spoiled me. But the attackers, the criminals, the bad actors, the threat actors, a lot of names for these folks, but they're all unauthorized, and they're coming in, they're logging in through compromised credentials. How did they get those? Often phishing and social engineering. But that's not the only way. The social engineering, a high profile case again in the news where social engineering was in play. They called the help desk and impersonated an admin. In fact, an identity provider admin, and that was trouble. Turns out when you become an identity provider admin or a domain admin or whatever, you can let yourself into everything in the organization, and that's bad news. How do you catch that? That's the real question. How do you catch that? Monitoring, vigilance, all kinds of stuff. Process, human stuff, that icky human stuff. But less human stuff, softer vulnerabilities. I know VMware doesn't have any softer vulnerabilities, but if we did, they might be and I kid, of course. We do have softer vulnerabilities. We will continue to have softer vulnerabilities. Being in a position to remove them, patch them out of existence is really important. And then trusted relationships, like the trust between different systems, the trust between entities. The US Department of Defense, for example, is really concerned about how much it has to trust its contractors. And so there's a lot of work that goes on there. And speaking of that, I'll talk about the security configuration guide at the end, but we also have STIG work that looks, the security configuration guide and the STIGs look a lot like each other. The STIG has got more DoD specific things, if that's your speed. But yeah, we do a lot of work in that space. So then what happens after the breaches, and knowing this stuff can help us defend our environments. Well, one, ransomware, we hear about that all the time. Ransomware in blackmail. We don't hear about the blackmail so much, but that's kind of, you're ransoming data back. But they, the attackers will often steal secrets, steal data. Think about a law firm. A law firm holds a lot of confidential information about their clients. And that's a gold mine for criminals, because not only can they blackmail and ransom the law firm, but they can blackmail and ransom the law firm's clients as well. And we've seen it go 3 levels deep even, and that's crazy. You don't want to be in that situation. You're going to lose customers. Shorting stock, if you're a company that makes something, they might take your intellectual property and give it to a competitor of yours, or sell it to a competitor of yours. Or if they're a nation state, maybe they have manufacturing capability that they can just compete with you directly. Sorry about the picture-in-picture thing. It's covering a little bit of this, but just says blackmail on the back end of that. And then the last thing, and probably the most insidious one, is if you're a company that makes things, think about IoT, think about whatever, implanting malware, like SolarWinds back in the day. And that compromise was devastating, because the attackers were able to get into all sorts of other systems because they implanted malware and backdoors, and then cuckoo's egg sort of thing. And so that's a good book, by the way, The Cuckoo's Egg by Clifford Stoll, if you're looking for a cybersecurity book to read. It's a little old, and I think it's out of print, but you can find it used for pretty cheap. But yeah, good short read. But you hear about the blackmail and the ransomware a lot. That makes the news. You hear about the stealing of secrets very little, and the attackers absolutely don't want you to know that they're there if they're trying to leave something behind. And that's tricky. So let's get to what we should do about it. How do we secure the perimeter? How do we go from the bottom up on the stack? And I will say, I've been playing with my illustrations here. Are AI generated. I asked DALL-E 3, the new one from the ChatGPT folks, to generate an image based on hardware security, and this is what it gave me. You'll see a few of these other ones, but trying to lighten it up a little bit. But yeah, hardware is really interesting. Like I said, we don't deal with it too often, but it's a really important thing, because one, it's the basis for all of what we do. Two, it can be a backdoor. And so to that end, management controllers. We'll talk about 3 different aspects of hardware here. Management controllers. One, I've got to call out HPE. I've been doing some work with HPE recently here, and I really like that they have a technology brief. It sounds very stodgy, technology brief, but it's actually got a lot of information about hardening their ILOs and that. And I think that's terrific. Shipping stuff in a known good configuration, having good security stuff, and that's nice. And so kudos to them. You can find just Google for this. But in general, you've got these management controllers, and I'm sorry about the list, but actually people do like lists here, and I'll just walk through all of the stuff. So one, goes without saying, but we still have to say it. Don't forget about the hardware management controller when you're deactivating services you don't use. They come with everything turned on, because what if you might want to use it, right? Well, yeah, what if the attacker wants to use it too? VNC is a really nice way to get in, So shut IPMI off. IPMI is fairly insecure to start with. VNC, Redfish, IPv6. If you're not actively using IPv6, disable it, shut it off, because if somebody lights up IPv6 on your network segment, you're going to get things are going to have an automatic address, most likely, not always, but if you shut it off, 10-year-old M630s here, this is their iDRAC 8 or so, but it's got this pass-through thing, which seems interesting, and some stuff uses it. You might want to check to see if things are using it, if you've got a VX rail or whatever, but more often than not, you're not actually using this, and you can shut it off because it's a backdoor. and you can shut it off from the iDRAC side of things, and I'll show you how to shut it off. There's actually a parameter in vSphere 8, ESXi 8, to disable the creation of the virtual NICs as well. So you can shut it off from both directions. It's kind of like a shared adjacent hotel rooms where there's a lock on both sides of the door between them, that sort of thing. And that's good. Deactivate USB configuration settings. So, think about a colo where you're not, a data center where probably know who's going to be in it. You've got some access control, all that stuff. That's one thing. But a colo facility, more and more folks who don't want to go to the cloud just want this stuff out of their data center. So they put it in a co-location facility, and that's great. You can walk down the rows and you can see exactly who's running what, and in many cases there's stuff. Oh, my camera is frozen here a little bit. There's in many cases you can walk down and you can get into the racks from the side and things. Yeah, sorry, my video is freaking out here. Here, hang on just a second. Let me share the screen directly. Hey, this is a live stream. Anything can happen, right? So here, let me put me back on, and I'll just do the presentation. There we go. All right, we'll try it that way. Excellent. Sorry about that. I'm having some problems. I've got an ATEM mini switcher here and having a little bit of a problem with it lately. Oh, my video is back now. Whatever. We'll continue this way. Turn on closed captioning if closed captioning should be an option if you'd like. But anyhow, getting back to it, the ability to reach into a rack from the side, or from under the floor. I know concrete floors are more the norm now, but and to insert a USB key in that, and maybe it's not even malicious. Maybe somebody in your own organization has a USB key that they'll leave there, but it's got boot information on it. Maybe it's an old Windows installer or something like that. That's trouble. And a lot of these iDRACs, the iDRAC, for example, if it sees a particular file, an XML file, on that USB key, it'll treat it as configuration data, and so you need to tell it not to do that. So USB ports, you should let the operating system on the host manage them. That way you can manage the security of them more holistically. 2, you can go and disable, if you're not using the XML first boot configuration or whatever, I would suggest that you disable that you shut that off. Or if you are using it, once you're done with it, switch it, because there's an intermediate thing only when the server has default credential settings. Well, there's ways to reset iDRACs and ILOs in that outside from external to the host, and so it might have default credential settings. You actually want the that set to disabled, that sort of thing. Next on my list, seems straightforward, but people forget about it. Set NTP so that when you're forwarding your logs, and set DNS and forward your logs to your syslog servers. These management controllers are little computers. They're little servers on top or aside your big servers, and they need to be managed. They need to have DNS. They need to have proper time so that if somebody is trying to break in, you have visibility to that, and so set up email alerts. The iDRACs, the ILOs allow you to, and I'm picking on HPE and Dell, but I'm sorry about that, but if you've got other stuff, Cisco, all this stuff, it's pretty common feature set there. You can set up email alerts, even if you don't have a lot of smaller organizations don't have they don't have network operation centers or security operation centers. That's fine, but you set up an email alert so that even if you've got a hardware problem, a memory fault or whatever, it'll email you and tell you about it. And that's super helpful. Make good authentication choices. A lot of these controllers can be set up so that they're attached to Active Directory or whatever. And is that a good choice? 1, it's a dependency. 2, it's a source. It's a threat vector. It's an attack vector there. And tying your infrastructure and your infrastructure management interfaces to the same identity provider as the rest of your enterprise, the rest of your business, is trouble. We've seen at least one high profile thing lately where that was true. And that's there's a lot more that I can't talk about. It's a very common attack vector, so protect for it. Last on my list, while you're in there, configure the front panel LCD displays and the buttons wisely. And you can leak information. The idea of leaking information is where you unintentionally tell an attacker something that they can use. The front panel LCD displays will often show a system name, or DNS information or IP information, that sort of thing. Do you want that? Do you want an attacker or somebody, maybe, do you want your competitors that are down the row in your co-location facility, do you want them to be able to see that stuff? Probably not. A lot of those co-location facilities don't have solid front panels. And you could even get a wire in through the mesh there to push buttons, that sort of thing. And so should you disable the power button? I don't know. There's pros and cons to that, but yeah, I don't know. Something to think about, especially if you don't necessarily trust everyone that's around your physical servers. Let's move on to UEFI firmware settings. A little different than the management controllers, and there's a lot of firmware settings that need to be updated. I will say that legacy BIOS boot is deprecated in vSphere 8. We're moving towards UEFI. UEFI is nice because you can turn on secure boot. Secure boot fixes a lot of the things. We've seen Mandiant and CrowdStrike write blog posts about how they're watching attackers, APT groups, all that stuff break into environments, and it's troublesome. I worry about it because half of those blog posts, if the victims, if the vSphere environment had secure boot turned on, it wouldn't have been a thing. They wouldn't have been able to do that. And so that's turn it on. Secure boot's been around for 14 years now. It's safe to use. I will also say that servers are not delivered with optimal firmware configurations for ESXi. I mean, even HPE talks about it in their system guides and that. Like I said, I've been doing a lot of work with that, and we've got a white paper coming out soon around that, end of the month, and in the VMware Explorer Barcelona timeframe with HPE. And they even talk about it. The servers are set up for general purpose, most compatible settings in that. And so you want to flip it to virtualization. You want to go in there and turn on some things. Amit, hey, and just a reminder, if you're joining us here, if you've got questions, if I trigger a question in your mind and you want to ask it, put it out. Don't be shy. Put it out in the comments, or put it in the chat and on YouTube. We're on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn. Twitter, the comments don't work so well, but if you want to ask a question, come on over to YouTube. But Amit, does VMware have a book.pdf, a PDF for hardening best practices? Yes, we do, and I will get to it. It's called the Security Configuration and Hardening Guide, and in fact, I added the hardening to it recently, so that better search engine stuff. And so yeah, basically we've got that. I'll talk about it at the end. You can Google for it right now. You'll find it. And yeah, so let's get back to the UEFI firmware here. So UEFI secure boot, please turn it on, and please do it for your VMs as well. We'll talk about that next week. Again, I'll be talking about protecting workloads. I'll use Active Directory as an example next week. Will I share the hardening guide? Yeah, it's shared already. It's been shared for 15 years. It's out at it's out on core.vmware.com, and if you go to solutions at the top, if you go to solutions at the top and go to security, you'll see it right there, that sort of thing. Let's see if I can get my video back here. Hey, there's one thing. Oh, you know what? I can do it this way. I'm still up. Oh, that's weird. Here, I'll do it. No, maybe not. We'll just keep doing it this way. So UEFI secure boot. Yep, sorry, live stream weird stuff happens sometimes. That's not a challenge, please, but we'll just roll with it. Anyhow, TPMs, trusted platform modules. Go and turn them on. They're usually not shipped in a configuration that ESXi can use, and that's interesting. You need to flip them to SHA-256, the FIFO settings. And if you're not familiar with trusted platform modules, they're tiny. Yeah, here, actually, I will go back to my video here. I've got this one, in fact, right in front of me here. It's very tiny. It's like the size of my, oops, and I dropped it. It's like the end of my pinky, that sort of thing. And they're buried on a system board. And they do a few things for us. They're a secure enclave for secrets to start with. They let ESXi store secrets, the encryption keys, that sort of stuff. Second, they're a serial device. It's actually more like a modem than anything else. They communicate at 115.2 on the system board. They're not fast, but they don't have to be. They don't move a lot of data around. On a host, they belong to ESXi. Workloads do not store, especially if you've got a virtual TPM. Virtual TPM has got nothing to do with the hardware ones. And this one, the hardware TPM, is only for ESXi to store its information there. If we let workloads, and I know some virtualization platforms do let you pass the hardware TPM through. We don't do that because it ties the VM to that host. If that host fails for some reason, then you're in trouble, and so we want vMotion and all that stuff to be available. That's why we do it the way we do. It's I mentioned it stores encryption keys for native key provider, configuration encryption, all that sort of stuff. And it doesn't help you if your server is stolen, because if your server is stolen, the thief is going to have the keys. If anything that's stored in a TPM is going to go with them. So keep that in mind. This is the sort of stuff you got to think about at the hardware level. And that's important. Well, you're in the server firmware. Enable SGX, enable SEVES. Even if you don't plan to use it, turning it on at the hardware level costs you almost nothing. AMD SEVES, you need to set the number of domains, which is the number of different VMs that you might have on a host. I think the max is generally 256. Set it to 256. You're going to lose a trivial amount of RAM to that. And it's just basically setting up the structures. And then you can use it later in vSphere if you want. You don't have to go edit all your hardware settings and reboot and all that stuff. Turn it on and allow yourself flexibility into the future. TXT, trusted execution technology. Turn it on, and actually if you try turning this on a host, it's going to require UEFI secure boot and a few other things, and that's great. It's going to enforce security. But trusted execution technology, if it's there and enabled in the hardware, ESXi will use it to enforce security as well. USB for keyboards. You often get a choice. Do you want USB for everything, like storage and all that stuff? Should USB be only for keyboards? Should it be the front USB, the back USB? Should it be off completely? Do remember that the securest option, the most secure option, securest, I don't think that's a word. But the most secure option is to shut it completely off. But you might have to walk up to these things at some point with a monitor and a keyboard. And so don't hurt yourself there. And don't cause bigger problems later when you in securing it now. Always think about what you might need for emergency operations later, and then how you're going to protect it. Performance options. Enable all the performance options that are shut off. On an HPE system, you flip it to the virtualization profile, and then there still might even be some stuff that's shut off, because that virtualization profile is probably for ESXi 6.5 or 6.7. And so go in there. There's a bunch of stuff on Dell's too. Like I just reset a couple of lab hosts of mine. I had to go in. Everything was off, all the cool stuff that you can turn on. And if you're wondering about it, they often have little tooltips next to them in the BIOS now, or the firmware, or you can just Google for it and you'll see that, hey, this is a performance enhancement. Turn it on and get the performance. You're paying for the host. Get as much out of them as you can. Speaking of that, there's always a tendency to just set the power control to, as the movie quote goes, turn it to 11, that sort of thing, and always operate it on turbo, that sort of thing. But let ESXi control the power states. Turn it to OS controlled power functionality there, OS controlled profiles. And ESXi can then, it does a really good job of maintaining efficiency, and that helps save your organization money. And, it'll do the right thing. And you can control the turbo mode from inside ESXi's settings as well. And so, again, doing it in software there is a lot easier than having to go mess around in the hardware. Last thing on my list here, updating system firmware. You absolutely need to be in a position that you can update your system firmware. And, vSphere, ESXi ships CPU microcode with new releases. When there's a new release of ESXi, we will ship the latest CPU microcode that's available to us. But, that might lag a little bit. And it doesn't cover other things like the Intel management engine, for example. It doesn't cover device firmware, all that stuff that you would get as part of the normal, the out of band management thing. I don't know about HPE stuff. I've been talking a lot about them, but Dell has done a great thing for a long time. You can just type in downloads.dell.com to your iDRAC and punch the check for update button, and it's kind of cut off here at the bottom. But I have network firmware that's available to my host. And at the bottom of this page, I really need to have a new screenshot here. At the bottom of this, I can stage it for install, so it'll install at the next reboot. And that's terrific. I can stage new BIOSes, all that stuff. And then the next time I patch my environment, as it reboots, it'll patch the firmware. And that's super easy, it's really nice. It's low key, and you can get this stuff done and be secure at these levels too. The Intel management engines and things like that, there are places for attackers to hide there. There's some news this morning, in fact, about a hardware vendor that has basically been found to have insecure system management tools and things on the system board that attackers can actually establish persistence. They can kind of live there, and that's kind of their server to attack everything else. And so you kick them out of your server, they get right back in. Where did they come from? They came from the hardware itself. So it's really important. And they're just using vulnerabilities that are known right now. So it's really important to keep this stuff up to date. Let's move on. Isolation and perimeter security. This is what DALI 3, when I asked it for an abstract art about isolation and network perimeter security, this is what it had. I don't know. It's very strange, but I like it. As a reminder, if you're out here, thank you for joining us. I'm Bob Plankers. I'm a staff architect at VMware, and we're talking about hardening, part 1 of hardening. I'll do another session at the end of the month as part of Cybersecurity Awareness Month in the US here. And so not really branding it that way, but, good opportunity to talk about this stuff. And so, if you've got questions, we're streaming to 4 different platforms. If you've got questions, put them out in the comments, and I will answer them. We've had a few comments thus far, and that's great. More questions, don't be shy. So step number 1, please do not put your IT infrastructure on the internet. This is Shodan.io. It's a search engine for Internet of Things stuff, and it is it's got a lot of things in there that probably shouldn't be on the internet. You can search for ESXi. This morning it was 14,000. We've seen it as low as 5,000. We've seen it as high as 60,000. It fluctuates. I don't know why it fluctuates, but whatever. The stuff shouldn't even be there at all. So please protect it. And the friend of mine is doing an experiment right now on the internet, put a fully patched ESXi host out there. And is it hacked? No, it's not hacked, but the next vulnerability, it might be, and so you want defense. It's the concept of defense in depth is really important. The idea that you can, if there is a vulnerability, you're not instantly exposed. You've got something else there that can help you. Can help protect you until you get the problem fixed, that sort of thing. So how do we do that? How do we buy time? That's all we're doing here is buying time and this isolation. And we're also buying detectability. If we monitor people trying to get past our defenses here, it's kind of like a checkpoint. IT is like a castle. In fact, that graphic from DALI 3 here is actually kind of interesting. It is kind of like a castle. It's got a perimeter and everything. So maybe it's not so far off. But, we want to build a castle. We want well-known front doors. We want to guard them, guard the walls really well. And we want to patch any new holes that show up, that sort of thing. So how do we do that? VLANs. VLANs are a way to isolate different network traffic, and that's cool. VLANs are not necessarily a security thing. There's ways to trick routers into accessing VLANs, especially if you have a default VLAN. If you're running VLAN trunks, please don't have a default VLAN configured, because there's a lot of different tricks that people can do to use that default VLAN to get to the router, and you don't want that. So you can go as far as having separate network interface cards, NICs, and a lot of organizations will use VLAN trunks on one set of interfaces, and then for management and workloads, and then put their storage and vMotion traffic on another set of network interfaces so they can monitor performance. This isn't always about security, performance and that availability, though availability is a big part of security too. So here, let's see if I can let's see if my stuff is working here anymore. Yeah, here, let's do it. There we go. All right. I don't know what was going on there, but firewalls. Here, let's talk a little bit about firewalls. Let's see if my stream is. Yep, we're doing all right. So, again, if you've got questions or comments, put them on the chat. I'm happy to answer them. I'm going to be here for a while. This is kind of a long talk, and we're about a little over a third of the way through, to be honest. So, firewalls, ACLs, VPNs. So firewalls and ACLs, if you can get away with not using ACLs are rough because there's not reflexive rules. It's not stateful, that sort of thing. If it's the only thing you've got, that's fine. Use what you've got, like it just use in car racing, there's a term, run what you brung, use what you have, and so, but firewalls, a stateful firewall for your management interfaces, you can get inexpensive ones, and put some isolation there, put some, let's see, we got a question coming in. Will this video be available later on? It absolutely will. Errors and everything. I'm not even going to edit it. The raw video will be here up on our YouTube channel, and you can come back and watch the end of it if you have to go. So good question. VPNs, though, you have a parameter. People talk about air gaps. I don't mention air gaps here. Maybe I should. The idea that you've got a physical separation between your computing environment and the rest of the world, the internet and all that stuff. Those are really tough. There's a lot of stuff that assumes that you've got at least a little bit of outbound connectivity to pull updates and things. And where you don't, that's a lot of extra work on admins, and so things aren't going to get done that might need to be done. So that's that security trade-off I was talking about earlier. And so one way might be to put a perimeter around all your management interfaces and then VPN into it from a privileged access workstation. Microsoft has often talked about PAWS, privileged access workstations, in terms of Active Directory, but it's a good concept for pretty much anything where you might need to segregate access and really define who can get into an infrastructure. And so, just some ideas. Again, context is everything. Your environment might be able to support some of these ideas, might not be. Next time you build a new environment, maybe you want to incorporate some of these ideas. I do like talking I do like mentioning that the vCenter server appliance has got its own firewall. It's basically IP tables on the back end and a little interface, a simple interface for it. And you can't delineate which ports go where or whatever, but you can add extra controls here, and this is nice, especially in an environment where you might not be able to cut off everyone. Environments where all the desktops can get to all the management interfaces, that's tough. And it might be a political battle to get that changed. Well, you can just do a little bit of security work, not encouraging you to be insubordinate, but maybe a little bit, do a little bit of security work and tighten that down and then see who complains, that sort of thing. So there's some options available to you. Likewise, the distributed switches, they have this thing called traffic filtering and marking, and it's like ACLs for the port group. The again, ACLs are not perfect. But you can set up rules on a per port group level. And a couple of things I will mention. One, the port groups, you can have multiple port groups with the same VLAN configured on them. So if you've got different sets of workloads and you want to isolate them and you don't have NSX, of course, being the premier sort of microsegmentation thing, this is a way to microsegment with just the distributed switch. And again, ACLs, they're not reflexive or anything like that. But if you can kind of isolate it, maybe you can do it in bigger chunks. I don't know. It's a tool in your toolbox, and you can use it for hardening your environments and getting some stuff done there. Ingress and egress. So most people firewall coming in, but what about firewalling on the way out? And, Log4j, really, anybody who was firewalling the egress, the outbound connections, didn't have a problem with Log4j. In fact, they were the folks that could actually see whether their environment was compromised or not, whether people were trying Log4j exploits and things. And that was nice. It's a nice demonstration that technique actually works, because it's kind of a pain to set up the first time. You got a lot of rules, and we've been trying at VMware. I've been trying to catalog all of the rules that you need and going where and for what. We've got it on ports.vmware.com. I've actually got ports.vmware.com is actually a little limiting, in my opinion. So I actually published the on core.vmware.com. If you go to the security configuration guide pages and the security hardening advice for vSphere, you'll find a link to this as well. It's the spreadsheet, and Excel is the greatest database on the planet. I'm not even you can fight me on that one or whatever. It's a hill I will die on. I just published the Excel spreadsheet that I use to feed ports.vmware.com. Hey, we've got a LinkedIn user saying, "What's your YouTube channel?" So thank you. It's the VMware vSphere channel. So just search for vSphere. I think it's just VMware vSphere, all one word, youtube.com/VMware vSphere. But you can find it in the search engine too. So please, as my kids would say, like and subscribe. We've always got new content coming out on the vSphere channel as well. So we appreciate your subscription. But anyhow, firewalling, let's get back to that. Enough of the streaming stuff. Firewalling, very important, and, be granular about it. One of the things that we've learned recently, I was talking to Anders Olsen at Explore this year. He did a great presentation about hardening at Explore and how, attackers get in and things. He's got a lot of very real world experience with this stuff. And and we found that we've talked about a lot of the same things, just in different ways, and it's nice. He was talking about even limiting we've learned recently that DNS is often used for exfiltrating data, because people allow DNS to communicate out and out to the world. And that's trouble. An attacker can use it as a channel outbound, unprotected. That's real trouble, and it's hard to defend against. I'm going to do some work in that, and we'll see what we can do with vSphere moving forward here. But the other one too is that I lost my train of thought. The granularity of the firewall rules for things like Active Directory, that if you're not using your corporate Active Directory, you should block it off. Attackers who have gained access to your corporate Active Directory will sometimes join your ESXi hosts to the corrupted corporate Active Directory, and so that they can circumvent your security controls. That's trouble. And so blocking egress, and not trusting your organization. This is when I was saying earlier, trusted relationships, that's trouble. Trust no one, right? Like the old X-Files stuff. All right. The other thing too, routed or unrouted. Does your vMotion interface need to be routed at all? Does vSAN need to be routed? There are good reasons for routing those. You might need to vMotion. You might need to do cross vCenter vMotion to the cloud or to another environment that's not on the same network segment or whatever. But if you're not using this stuff, if you're not doing that sort of thing, and if you do need that just temporarily, you can turn on vMotion on the management interface or whatever, just make sure you shut it off again, that sort of thing. But, there's temporary solutions, and then there's permanent things. And if you don't need it on a permanent basis, if you don't need routing, don't even let people come in. That's, hey, what the heck? I had a lot of unrouted network segments in my past, and it was nice, because I didn't have to worry about them. One big question, and this is a question, it's, should you put vCenter in or on the same network as your ESXi management? A lot of places will put it on a separate network segment than ESXi, but why? You should, in my opinion, you should be protecting them all together. And in fact, in my opinion, introducing a firewall in between them is a chance for the firewall to fail, or an admin to add firewall rule, or enterprise firewall admin to add a firewall rule that breaks connectivity, that sort of thing. And so I don't know. I kind of err on the protect it all as one unified thing. You shouldn't be logging into ESXi directly anyhow. And we'll talk about that in a second here. But, yeah, I don't know. Again, context matters. In your organization, there might be political ideas and political obstacles to changing it, but something to think about. So let's talk about identity management. That's a good segue. This is actually mid-journey. I asked it for a painting in the style of Georges Seurat, the pointillist painter from the late 1800s, with on the topic of identity. And this is what it gave me. And I actually really like it. I think I like Midjourney a little bit more at this point, but that's neither here nor there. The thank you, Waldemar. The hey, good to see you too. The the security. Let's talk about the security of identity management. So important, because attackers are just logging in to stuff, and they're logging in as admins. And when you log in as an admin, you can do whatever you want, right? Including disable security controls. And so isolation from the corporate and enterprise IDPs, really important. Again, look in the news. If you want any examples of this, just look in the news for the last couple of months, and you'll see a bunch of examples of where this has gone wrong. And, their pain, we can learn from their pain. Their pain is not for nothing. We can collectively, if we're smart about it, we can learn from it. So, I do have a deep sympathy for people that get hit by ransomware, and that attackers are clever and they're patient, and they've often been in the network for a long time, and they wait for that 1 0 day. They wait for that one vulnerability, and they use those gaps between when you patch and when that vulnerability was announced. And it's scary. So defenders have to be on their game 100% of the time. Attackers just have to get lucky once, is the saying. Second, do authorization inside, and thank you, William, for the compliment. Do authorization inside vSphere, not inside your IDP. So by authorization, so there's authentication, which is, hey, I am Bob. I prove that I am Bob. But authorization is Bob gets to be an administrator. So whoever proves that he is Bob is an administrator. Well, if your IDP does it, then whoever breaks into your IDP, your identity provider, can change that. They can drop themselves into a VMware admins group, the ubiquitous VMware admins group in Active Directory somewhere. They just drop themselves in there, and then they can just log in. And if you're monitoring for failed logins, there's not going to be a failed login attempt, because it's going to be a success, because they granted themselves access. Again, trouble, and we can defend against it. It's as simple as just breaking it out. Don't use that group, the vSphere admins group here. Don't pull it in. Just individually authorize people and just add them to the administrators group in SSO. And this is something you can do right now. And again, it's kind of like the VCSA firewall. This is something you can do to tighten up your security. And one, it prevents the Active Directory admins from adding themselves. We've heard about that a couple of times. In fact, the first presentation I ever did, that almost 5 years ago, where I mentioned this, some guy walked up to me afterwards and said that he caught his domain admins doing this, and that they were logging into storage arrays and all that stuff. Domain admins become de facto admins of everything in your organization. And that's a lot of trust. But it also prevents the attackers. A rogue admin can't add themselves to your environment. It makes them compromise a specific account. So if they compromise my Plankers-admin account or ADM account here, I'm probably going to know, because how are they going to compromise it? They're going to reset my password, and then I'm not going to be able to log in. I'm going to go, and some curse words are going to come out of my mouth, very polite words, of course. And I'm going to go find my domain admin and say, hey, why can't I log in? And they're going to go, well, you changed it. They're going to look in the logs. They're going to say, you changed your password 3 days ago. And I said, and I'll say, I did not change my password. And then we'll go all Clifford stole cuckoo's egg, tracking down, the why that happened and how it happened, and then probably being scared for our lives at that point. But knowing is better than not. You can nip the stuff in the bud. You can call incident response people and have them help you before you get hit with ransomware. Two, old advice, using a different login for the account. So I've got an unprivileged account on my desktop, Plankers. Okay. If I click on something dumb, and humans are just gonna do their thing. We're gonna click on dumb things. It's just a feature of humans. It's not something we can fix. And every security training in the world says don't click on URLs in an email, and then the next email in your inbox has got a URL in it to click on, and it's legit. It's because it's easy, right? And so the and so we're eventually going to click on something that we shouldn't. Maybe my desktop login gets compromised. Plankers. Well, at the very least, if they try to log into other stuff, we'll force them to generate failed login attempts, and might be able to see that. We want to force them to make an error that we can see. And so using a separate account that's privileged and a separate username that's privileged is a good idea. Straight up, it's easier for you to audit too. You can see exactly who's got access and what access that is, and it's just a form of separation of duties and least privilege. That's really important. These are old school security. This is old school security stuff, and so the old guidance, the old advice still works here. So, hey, we've got some folks joining live from Australia. Excellent. Well, I'm glad for it. Sorry if it's like the middle of the night or early in the morning or whatever, but yeah, good to have you here. Anybody who's joining, please, we've got comments and questions. If you've got comments and questions, put them out on in the chat. And here we're on a couple of different platforms, but I'm using StreamYard to aggregate them. And I think we're going okay here. Got some glitches out of the way, and we got a good crowd here. So I appreciate you greatly. I'll be doing a talk next week, Tuesday, about the same time, about protecting. I'll use Active Directory as an example, but protecting workloads, protecting Active Directory, all the stuff above. I had a graphic above the cut line in my graphic earlier. We're talking about infrastructure, and I'll have another talk, part 2 to this at the end of the month. So subscribe to our YouTube channel, watch the vSphere blog. I'll post it on the vSphere blog, that sort of thing. So I appreciate y'all. Thank you for being here. So we're talking about hardening identity in access control in vSphere. It's a big attack vector, and and again, just look at the news and you'll see why. Identity federation. So identity federation, you can introduce multi-factor authentication. And MFA is not the end-all be-all of security. There are ways to abuse it as well. Uber had an attack last fall or whatever, where the attacker was a high school kid, and he was beside himself that his attack worked, and he taught the entire world something, which was he figured out when one of their lead engineers was asleep, and just started spamming the dude's phone, and the guy's phone. In his sleep, he just basically rolled over or whatever, he rolled over and made his phone stop bugging him. How did he do that? He hit yes, and he let the attacker in. And whoops, but again, humans are going to human. What do I do? What I do in my sleep? I don't know, like my wife complains about it sometimes, you snore, well, of course I do. But I don't know that I snore, I don't know that I allowed an attacker via my MFA app, so. Again, there's some, and we'll talk about controls to deal with that in a second. But 80 over LDAP-S, venerable. It's going to continue being around. RSA Secure ID, smart card support, the single sign-on from Windows to vSphere. Those are all deprecated and going to go away in the next version of vSphere. You can plug all of those things in to ADFS, though. ADFS, and I know people love to hate ADFS. The ADFS is a good generic way to introduce federated identity. And federated identity, by the way, is terrific because vSphere gets out of the business of handling credentials. All you do, you go back out to here. In fact, it's a web login. You go out to the identity provider, and then you come back with a ticket and a token to say, hey, I was authorized, and vSphere will let you in, that sort of thing. But to that end, we've added an 8 update 1 and 8 update 2, respectively, Okta support, direct federation with Okta, direct federation with Entra ID, which is Azure AD. They renamed it on us, that sort of thing. So if those are interesting to you, we're just figuring out some of the stuff. There was some stuff on Twitter the other day about figuring out Azure AD connectivity and opening up ports from the internet, and that we're figuring a lot of that stuff out as we go, but we've got support for it in there. The Azure AD Connect tool has been a popular one for most people trying to connect or get that connection working. So that's an on-premises appliance, for example. So we'll talk about authentication. My colleague Viviana is going to do one of these with me in a few weeks as well. We'll publish a schedule for that. But yeah, probably the next one after next week's thing. So that'll be interesting too. Anyhow, getting along my list here, restrict direct access to ESXi. Nobody needs access to ESXi. The rest of all the desktops in the organization do not need access. Whoever does need access, drive it through vCenter. Drive it through the role-based access control model. The ESXi access control model, I wouldn't even call it an access control model. It's very simplistic. And anybody who SSHs into ESXi, by the way, is root, is it an administrator? Because that's a troubleshooting interface. Shut it off, Similarly, this is not vSphere guidance per se. This advice should be for all of your IT infrastructure. Who can get to the storage management interface? Who can get to your backups? That's the big thing. Almost nobody should be able to get to your backups because that's your last line of defense. vCenter server, though, restrict that to only people that absolutely need access to it. vCenter server is for vSphere admins. It's not for workload admins. It's not for all the doctors in your healthcare organization. It's not for, all that stuff. Just as you wouldn't let anybody wander around in your physical data center, you probably have a lock on the door. You probably don't. This is your virtual data center. Don't let anybody wander around in your virtual data center too. Workload admins should RDP or SSH into their workloads directly because the firewall rules get a lot easier. Access control, auditing, all that stuff is way easier when they're not all those rules are not commingled. RDP, by the way, at Explore, I heard an interesting thing. RDP, ransomware distribution protocol. I thought that was really funny, and I share it with you now. But yeah, trouble. So make sure that you've got separation there. Reduce permissions for service accounts. One of the biggest lies sysadmins tell themselves, and I'm saying this from experience, 24 years of experience basically as a sysadmin, not counting my VMware time here, where, pretend sysadmin, I guess at this point. I still do some stuff. One of the biggest lies we tell ourselves is that we're going to come back. I'll just get it working. I'll come back and fix it later. No, I won't. Something else will distract me. A squirrel running past, and and then the next thing you know, that account is being used by an attacker to break into something. And so, how do you deal with it? One, you can create an account and that has no permissions, and then try to do something. And vCenter server will tell you what permission you're missing to try to do it. Two, you can actually use a new feature. We've got a privilege recorder now. It's API driven. It's a little different. And William Lamb, in fact, just wrote a really nice article about this. About how to use it and recommends doing it using a test system. I recommend that as well. Using a test vSphere instance or vCenter server instance, you basically checkpoint the thing. You start recording permissions, and then you try to do whatever you need to do, or you do what you need to do, and then you stop the recording, and then you can see all of the authorizations that were required. And so you can build a role that's very custom to what was needed to do that thing. And the way it's done this way is so that you can have service accounts and things. You can have your backup system log in and try it, that sort of thing. And that's why it records the way it does here. It might seem a little odd, but but it's actually a good way to do it. But like I said, and like William said, use a test system for it because it's less noisy at that point. Number 8 on my 9-item list here, enable advanced features in your IDP. So this is more of an Azure AD, Okta, Ping, Duo. We're going to support Ping in the future too, by the way. And looking at other stuff, we'll have a survey that goes out in a little bit here about authentication mechanisms. Maybe I'll feature it next week, and that have you folks chime in about what you're using for authentication. But enable the advanced features, conditional access. Why is Bob logging in? Bob should never be logging in from Guam, for example, and or logging in from Puerto Rico in the U.S. and in the U.S., territory. But I should never be logging in from Mexico. And if I am trying to log in from those places, deny it. Geographic location, phishing resistant MFA, that's number matching. Is that a little bit more annoying? Yes. But is it better at proving that the actual human is there? Yes. And device hygiene, a lot of stuff can check to make sure that the device that's doing the authentication or doing the access control, my iPhone is updated to the latest version, that sort of thing. And use those things, especially for admins. You might pick and choose for normal people in your organization, but admins, you're a special case. You're allowed into a lot of stuff, and there's a lot of trust. And with a lot of trust comes a lot of responsibility, right? Thank you, Spider-Man. Last on my list, access logs, ensure. So that was something that came out of the Azure AD troubles from the last 3 months or so, that, access logs weren't necessarily being retained for very long. And so that a lot of these breaches happen, the initial access happens, and then the breach, it's really long. And it's a really long time before anything visible happens. And so you want to be able to track that back. You want to be able to monitor for it. And so make sure that your IDP is doing that. Excellent. Well, we're at 2 o'clock here in southern Wisconsin. I've got a little bit left to go. Let's get into the security configuration and hardening guide. If you've got questions, put them out in the chat. I'm glad that you're here. The recording will be available on our YouTube channel. Waldemar had put in the YouTube channel out in the chat. So thank you very much. I appreciate the assist there. The security configuration and hardening guide is the reference hardening implementation for vSphere. And there's other ones out there. There's DISA-STIGs. We publish a DISA-STIG. DISA-STIG has got things in it, controls in it, and it's a spread. The SCG is a spreadsheet. The STIG is set up differently because it's for the U.S. Department of Defense, and it's got a lot more complicated things. It recommends adding ESXi to Active Directory directly, which probably isn't the greatest idea in a general setting. But for the U.S. Department of Defense, they've got that figured out. And so the STIG is a hardening guide. It's an implementation guide. It's great. Use it as a data point. Again, context matters. If you're not part of the U.S. Department of Defense, maybe the security configuration guide is the better baseline, that sort of thing. And it documents defaults. The defaults change over time. We'll talk about the vSphere 8 one. I released a new one, released an update to the vSphere 7 guide last Monday, the 25th of September. And then I released a new one for 8 this morning, like 12:01 a.m. this morning here, Central Time in the U.S. And it's got auditing scripts in it. I know you've been asking for that for 15 years, and our lawyers finally let me do it. And I appreciate you, Ali, the lawyer that helped work it out. We also changed the license to the Apache, 2 different organizations, but the Apache license 2.0. So that actually it clarifies downstream use too, because is this stuff copyrighted? Yes, it is copyrighted by VMware, but we'd like people to use it. We'd like people to use the accurate stuff, the stuff we maintain, because we also test it too. So anyhow, getting along here, I'm just going to walk through the spreadsheet. Excel is the greatest database on the planet. I've said that already once, and it's the most popular database on the planet. And we're populating a spreadsheet now from a database, believe it or not. And that actually is why you see some of these things, especially the solution name and solution version. Solution is kind of what VMware speak for a bundle. We don't usually call it a bundle, but vSphere is kind of a bundle. It's ESXi and vCenter server. The 2 of them together are vSphere, but some things apply to ESXi and some things apply to vCenter server. And we've only got 1 tab now, all the controls in 1 tab, but they're filterable. So you can pick and choose. One of the other big things that we've done here is we've got this idea of a base product implementation, but we've also got features. So if you want to use Active Directory, you want to use iSCSI, you want to all that sort of stuff, we can actually list the feature there. And one of the goals here is to help auditors understand how this works, because auditors aren't technical necessarily. Some of them are, but a lot of them don't understand vSphere like you understand vSphere and like I understand vSphere. And so when we list an iSCSI control in there, they're going to check for it. And maybe you're not using iSCSI, and then it's going to get confusing. And we've had a lot of feedback about stuff like that. And so having the sort of conditional thing, people understand that. And so I'm hoping it doesn't pose a big problem, but trying to move this whole thing forward. Implementation priority. So we use the sort of VMware-esque classification of priorities: P0, P1, P2, and then I added an advanced. And so P0 means that the control is not secure out of the box. These are things we're changing these. We've got a bunch of product roadmap stuff to change these as we move forward, but sometimes the ecosystem gets in the way. We set a control, and then a partner will call us up. Dell is a big partner, for example. And Dell will call us up and say, "Hey, you're jamming up VxRail. We don't want to do that." And so we will back down off of it. And so that the product doesn't have a good default, you need to set that. P1, the product has a default, but it could be better. And a lot of banners. You'll see the security configuration guide. I added a bunch of banner stuff to it. And is that a security control? Not necessarily, but it was to sync up with the STIGs and a lot of our regulatory compliance guidance as well. And it's a good idea. Not that you're really ever going to catch the attacker, but if you do, it actually helps with prosecuting them. And so there's a book by John Strand, in fact, Black Hills Information Security, that talks about this sort of stuff. And actually, he's got an example. When I was reading it, my jaw dropped. His example is actually something from my former life, something that I ended up assisting with. And makes a good argument. So for book lists, reading list right now, we've got the Cuckoo's Egg and John Strand's book about defensive defense, something like that. Sorry, I don't remember the title. You'll find it. P2, it's set by default to what we recommend. Just make sure nobody changed it. That's all. And you can change this stuff. Context is everything. Sometimes you need this stuff changed in order to get something done in your life, and that's fine. Just document when you do this. Document why. Auditors want to know why. You don't have to have an argument. An auditor will often show up and say, "Hey, we scanned your environment and you fail on all these counts." And the audit scripts that I'm going to show you in a bit here are the same way. They're going to say you failed, and maybe not. I wouldn't take it personally. It doesn't meet the spec, and so just document why. If you changed it. Idle timeouts, for example. Idle timeouts have always driven me nuts. Back in the day, somebody would show up in my office, talk to me for 10 minutes. I talk a lot sometimes, and then talk to me for 10 minutes or 11 minutes, and I'd turn around and all my stuff's logged out. I hate that, and my compliance guy was actually like, "Well, let's change it." And I'm like, "Really?" He's like, "Yeah, it's not a straitjacket." So he just wanted to know, just document why it's set and don't go crazy, document why it's set the way it is and don't go nuts. Or don't go any more nuts than you are, at least. Let's see. Advanced is the last one here. And so there's some new stuff out there. The ability in ESXi 8 to deny shell access for things like the VPX user. VPX user, turns out attackers are breaking into vCenter server, unpatched, unprotected vCenter servers, which is problems number 1, 2, 3, 4. There's all kinds of stuff there. They're breaking into vCenter server, and then they're decoding the VPX user database password out of the database, the VCDB database on the appliance, and they're SSHing into, because people have SSH on for whatever reason, they're SSHing into the ESXi hosts as VPX user, and now they can do whatever they want. And so you can deny that, but does it break some stuff? We're pretty sure it will. What stuff is that? Well, we haven't found it yet because not enough of the ecosystem is using it yet. A lot of the security guidance has been around for 15, 20 years, and we know what the side effects are. This one, not so much. Does it break vSphere by itself? Nah, it doesn't appear to, but host profiles, for example, it might you're not going to be able to manage users in the same way, that sort of thing. So stuff labeled as advanced is stuff that you should think about, but take care to use. Waldemar's got another thing out in the chat here. You're a godsend, man. Thank you very much. We've got compliance frameworks too, and we're updating a lot of that stuff for vSphere 8 moving forward. A lot of that stuff is directed at VMware Cloud Foundation, which is great. You can pull it apart. There's a spreadsheet in there, and you can pull apart and use the vSphere tab and the components tab, the ESXi tab, and it'll look very strikingly similar to this stuff. Anyhow, moving through a description and a title. We've redone the titles to be more like an auditable thing, more like a compliance thing, matching the STIGs in many cases, updating them. We also changed a lot of uninclusive language, where we can, try to be more inclusive, and that's good. A discussion. I always try to explain. Oh, my video has failed here. Hang on just a second. Again, there. We'll do this. Sorry about that. I don't know what's going on here, but troubleshooting for my weekend here. Anyhow, so description and title. Is there a discussion? I always try to explain what the parameter does, and that's really important. I think it adds value. And people that read through this, I often tell a lot of people they want to know what the parameter changes, and I said, go read the description and the discussion and come back to me. Configuration parameter, fairly straightforward. The default value, what it's set to. This will change over time as we make improvements. And sometimes what the guide has and what the product has will sometimes differ. We tried to not have that be the case, but it happens from time to time. And that's why it's important to audit things. The suggested values will sometimes change as well. We've synchronized with vSphere 8. We synchronized with a lot of the compliance guidance and the STIG guidance, so that we really, really want to treat this as a baseline. You apply this, and then you don't have to have arguments about what the settings should be, because it's all the same guidance. And trying to smooth things out with your auditors, basically. Is it the default? Yes or no? Basically, if those other two columns match, then it is the default, that sort of thing. If it's not the default, if it is the default, you should audit it. If it's not the default, you should modify it. Pretty straightforward. Where the setting is located and the functional impact if it changes, if you change it from the default. And I need to update some of these things, because if you change some of these things that are set correctly by default, I should probably list that. But remember that the defaults sometimes are good. Again, it's some more discussion about what might happen. There are some things that, you change password quality control, and then other parts of the VMware ecosystem, third-party tools, and that might make an assumption about the password quality, and you might have to work around that. So just something to think about. Power CLI. In many ways, the Security Configuration and Hardening Guide is a great introduction to Power CLI, and I'm trying to make that even a better one with the scripts. And I promise I'm almost there. But we've updated these Power CLI command assessments. If you set a string in PowerShell to the name of your ESXi host, or the name of your vCenter server, the name of your port group, and you'll see this is in the documentation that comes along with the Security Configuration Guide. Then you set a variable for that, and then you can use these straight up. And many of them are the same things that we're using in the script too. In fact, the script is basically a way to audit our Power CLI examples too. We've got one to set it, and then we've got a remediation one. And how do you set it to the value that we recommend? And so, again, caution, some of these values, if you've got a running system, having a brand new system is great, and because you can set all this stuff and then work from there. If you've got a running system, you might need to take care to make sure that it doesn't interfere with something that's going on. Having a test environment is super important for security as well. Not only can you test patches, but you can test all this stuff too. There's no reason that all of you should have a vCenter server that is something that just is yours to play with and nested inside of perhaps your other environment, and an ESXi host that turns out you can run ESXi in a virtual machine. That's how we do the hands-on labs. That's how I do a lot of my testing. And you can run those inside your other infrastructure, do testing, try this stuff out. Does it perform very well? No, I wouldn't run any actual VMs in it. But, you can test all of the functionality, and it's a great place to learn about the stuff. You want to see how native key provider works, all that stuff. And so definitely urge you to do that. Set up a test environment for yourself. But the remediations, same sort of thing. It'll show you how to set it. Generally pretty straightforward. Some of the new interfaces, some of the ESX CLI stuff is there. Some of the new interfaces we've got, we're working on some new examples for that. Alignment with the STIG. If you are subject to the DoD's guidance, then which STIG element does it map to? Not yet assigned. Sometimes it doesn't. We submit the stuff to DISA for review, and then sometimes we find some things that will go in the next version of it. And so the folks that do the STIG do a great job at it. The STIG is also available out on the compliance page that Waldemar put in the chat, and on LinkedIn at least. So out on core.vmware.com. I've got the link here in a little bit here. Anyhow, this is STIG suggested value. Is it the same or is it different? I'd really like it if I had a script that, could apply the baseline and then could just apply the STIG, could just apply PCI DSS, that sort of thing. And so we're working our way that way. Internal configuration ID. I mentioned that this is being driven out of a database, and this is just mostly internal. And whether it's compatible with VMware Cloud Foundation. So that's important. Some of the stuff is not compatible with Cloud Foundation because it needs to. Somebody's mentioning vMug Advantage licenses. You've got licenses for your home lab or licenses actually, in your enterprise. You shouldn't use vMug Advantage stuff. You can't use them for production things, but you can use them for that test environment I'm talking about, and rather than recycling your licenses for your main environment, keep those separate. And so, great example. vMug Advantage licenses are terrific, and they're inexpensive. I don't know what they cost. They used to be like $100 or $150. Might be a little bit more now, but definitely well worth it. You get access to the entire range of most of the range of VMware products too. So that's helpful. Anyhow, VCF compatible, whether you should use it with VCF or not, and we keep that up to date as the new versions of VCF come out. Let's talk about scripts. The new scripts. They're in a tools directory. You download the zip file. There's a tools directory. And you need to connect to vCenter server in a couple of different ways. So I created a connect script. The old style connect VI server, but you also need the CIS server and the SSO admin connection as well. And so those are new. You might not be familiar with them. So I created a little script to connect to it. You can see that I'm logging in here. And it works fine. It'll connect your PowerShell session. You can do this from PowerShell 5.1. PowerCLI requires PowerShell 5.1 and newer. 5.1 is what comes with Windows 10. So you're probably in good shape there. You don't need to be an administrator either. I've got a profile here in my terminal. This is Windows Terminal. It's an add-on thing you can get from the Microsoft Store. It's terrific. You check it out, but it's nice. And this is just PowerShell in the terminal here on my Windows 10 box. So there's an audit ESXi script. Basically, once you're connected, you can point it at that, and it just goes through and dumps a whole bunch of data at you. Oh my goodness, and it's checking basically all the security configuration guide. There's a couple of things that it doesn't check. And actually, you know what? I've got a column. I added a column to the spreadsheet, and I didn't have it in my thing. I added a column whether it's checked or not. We don't check firewall rules. We don't check iSCSI right now. And there's a couple of things that don't have, a couple of SSO things that actually don't have public APIs to them. And we're fixing that. Sorry about that. We're fixing that, but we don't check those things. But we check the bulk of everything else. And so you'll see this big blob of data and you'll go, oh my goodness, Bob, this is a big wall of text. How do you deal with it? Well, as it turns out, PowerShell has got built-in, it's like the Unix grep select string. And so if you want to just look for the stuff that failed, and this is, by the way, this sample host here is not configured by default. I've messed it up in many different ways so that I could test this. And so you're just seeing the raw output from my test environment here. But the script, so we've got a question out here. Where's the script located? It is for right now, it is in the security configuration guide zip file. You download the security configuration guide for vSphere 8. This is for vSphere 8 right now. And I will likely backport it to 7, but I'm not there yet. 8 is first. And there's a tools directory in there. There's 5 scripts, and a document and some documentation about it. So I'll give you the URL. It's on core.vmware.com, or if you just Google for vSphere security configuration guide, it'll take you right there. So anyhow, we've got these, rather than building in filtering and all that stuff into the script, why don't we just use PowerShell's ability to do this? And so select string. I've got this stuff in the documentation, by the way, so don't worry about it. If you open that PDF file that's in the tools directory in the security configuration guide, it's got these examples in it. So maybe you want to write this to disk too. Well, it turns out there's this thing, the Unix TEE command has been around for ages, and it'll split the output. It'll write it to disk, and it will also spit it out to the console. Well, it turns out PowerShell has got the same thing. It's called T object. And so what I had it do here, in fact, let me back up and start again here. My little recordings. What I had it do is write it to output.txt, and then I'm also filtering here. So all of the outputs going to output.txt, and then just the failures are coming out here. So I'm going to open the whole output in Notepad. There it is. Easy, but you just need to know where to look. And so that's my help. What I'm hoping here is that I can help you figure out where to look and to get some of the stuff done. We can become better programmers, or users of PowerShell. At the same time, we're getting some productive stuff done. So VM auditing. There's a script to audit VMs. There's a script to audit ESXi, and a script to audit vCenter server. There's the connect script. So the VM script, same sort of thing. Basically, it leans into the defaults and it checks all of them. Some pretty straightforward stuff. vSphere 8 security configuration guide got rid of a lot of unneeded parameters. And so definitely make sure that you're using the latest copy of it. And if you're getting audited and somebody's using it, make sure that they're using the latest copy of it too. And linked out there, we've got some explanations of where those old parameters went, why they're not important anymore, that sort of thing. Give it to your auditor. So last, vCenter server. And you don't need to specify a name because you're already connected to it. We can figure that out already. So searching for problems on my vCenter server, my test one. Here, there's a few things. And to my point earlier, just because something fails doesn't mean it's actually a failure. So distributed port group, my vSAN port group, looks like it's configured to use a default VLAN. We were talking earlier today about using default VLANs, and that's a bad idea. There's a lot of ways to trick routers and firewalls, get around network security controls and that if you've got a default VLAN. And so this says, hey, Bob, you have failed. You have configured your vSAN port group in an insecure way. Well, I actually know that I haven't. It's actually an access port, and it's okay, and I'm comfortable with it. And that's also the choice you might make. Hey, you're comfortable with it. You're comfortable with that risk, and so we check for it, and you can decide after the fact. That's not something I'm going to fix. That sort of thing. So. Hey, whatever. But SSH into my appliance, obviously in a lab environment where I'm doing testing and things, I would want that enabled. But in a production environment where I've got things I need to protect, I would I can't even talk anymore. I would want that the appliance SSH to be off, that sort of thing. So what about auditing the whole thing? Well, if you create an output directory, I created an audit all script that will actually just recursively detect all your VMs and vCenter servers and ESXi hosts, and it'll write it all to the output directory. By the way, you're seeing some stuff, the VCLS VMs, it detects those as appliances, vSphere appliances. There's a flag in the audit thing to skip the safety checks. It's not supported to update the configurations of the appliances. So I don't do it by default, but if you want to audit it, far be it from me to stop you. Just use your head is all I ask, that sort of thing. So, and so this is just looping through my entire environment. I've got 4 hosts, 1 vCenter server, and 4 test VMs, plus the VCLS VMs. And so, and then if I want to, so we've got that audit directory. If I want to search through it, I could go and find all the failures. And it turns out so I've got that documented, how to do that too. This is the document that's in with the tools itself. And I've got the, no banners, the T object, the select string. I've even got one for searching through all of the directory here to get to find all the failures, so you're auditing, heck, there it is. And, it's easy because we're using PowerShell native stuff. So we've learned something, A, and B, we're on our way to making something more secure, very productive. And hey, I also have to say, and I mentioned it in the documentation too, Chat GPT, these large language models, Chat GPT is just wonderful for, I don't know where some of the stuff is either. I'm just like the rest of everyone. I'm not a PowerShell expert. So I asked Chat GPT, I want a PowerShell command that I can use to read all the text files in a directory called output, and then find the lines in them with the fail tag. And then I want to sort it alphabetically, and boom, it gives it to me. This is also great for regular expressions too. So, just something to keep in mind. Make yourself a better sysadmin by asking a machine for help. And nobody knows the wiser. Nobody is the wiser. Nobody knows otherwise. Anyhow, let's wrap this thing up. These last couple of illustrations are from Midjourney as well. This is, I don't know what Midjourney thinks is really interesting, but to reiterate, talking next Tuesday, probably a shorter talk, more along the lines of an hour, about workload security. Protecting Active Directory will be my example. There's some stuff that we can do in Active Directory and for Windows, but a lot of that stuff is generally applicable, and we'll talk about that. The same time, same starting time, 11 a.m. Pacific. Security configuration and hardening guide. Should you scan a QR code on the internet, especially one that goes to a redirector? Hey, I don't know. But if you just Google for the security configuration and hardening guide, you'll get to it. No problems there. If you do nothing else, please sign up for the Security Advisory mailing list. It's the most negative mailing list you'll ever be on. It only sends you bad news. And you should do this not just for vSphere, but for VMware products, but you should do it for all your vendors, because you want to know when there's a vulnerability, because, well, the bad guys probably already know is the thing. Somebody out there knows. A lot of these things were reported. VMware, we have a bug bounty program. Security researchers will report things to us, and so somebody out there knows already, and so you want to act quickly and to protect your organization. So yeah, sign up for this stuff. And then the rest of it, core.vmware.com. If you go to solutions, there's a compliance tab, there's a ransomware resilience tab, there's a security tab. All the stuff that I've been talking about today is on the security tab. But Waldemar was pointing out that there's a bunch of good stuff in the compliance tab as well. And that's growing. That's growing too. This next quarter here, we're going to do a bunch of work to help people understand and help auditors understand how PCI DSS and NIST 853 and a bunch of other stuff, HIPAA, all that stuff maps into the features and functionality of vSphere. We got a bunch of thank yous coming in. I thank you. It's my pleasure to be able to talk with you about this stuff. I enjoy what I do, and it's wonderful to have a community of folks that enjoy doing it with me and trying to be secure, learning about this stuff. If you've got questions, reach out. And I'm not sure about the comments on this. I'll enable the comments on this video. And so if you've got stuff, put something out there. But other than that, join me next week. Bring your questions and comments, and join me next week about this time and Tuesday, and we'll talk about workload security. Until then, I thank you all. You're terrific, and take care. Be secure.